Seán Hillen's fantastic book. And what a bargain. What a bargain. 25 quid. Now you have to do it, right? Let's just kind of get down to business here. You do have to do it. But at the same time, you can also hear fantastic words from the most wonderful Professor Roy Foster, who is the Carroll Professor of Modern History at Oxford University. And Roy is one of the most, I don't know, generous spirits and good souls who, like, I think everybody in this room appreciates Seán Hillen's art and does his bit to support it. So, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tanya. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's not out of the goodness of my heart I support Seán Hillen's art. It's out of passion and covetousness. But I also support Seán very warmly in all sorts of ways because of what he's done for the, if you like, it's not too pretentious, the national discourse of this strange country. I've described him somewhere, and actually it's on the back of this book, I think, as a national treasure. And I think he is a national treasure. His images have been borrowed and used on their books by historians like me, by literary critics like Luke Gibbons, you see here, by even government departments and the Board of Works, which is a Seán Hillen-esque irony that I think he must appreciate himself. Most of those images come from his immortal series Atlantis, those visionary conglomerative collages. They're manic, they're antic, they're sardonic. Where you see Thor Heyerdahl's Kon-Tiki raft fetching up Joyce's tower, where you see people gathering meteorites in Connemara, glaciers rearing up at the end of Dublin shopping streets, classical ruins materializing in Irish landscapes before astonished little men in sweaters from John and postcards. And finally, where we see immortally the Queen of Heaven beamed down by the solstice into the centre chamber of Newgrange. More recently, we've seen from Seán his astonishing series on the consolations of genius, or to put it rightly, what's wrong with the consolations of genius, which some of you, I hope many of you, will have seen in the Oliver Sears Gallery in 2011. Here we saw great Irish writers appearing in bemused conjunction with scantily clad screen goddesses, though never quite joining with them, which is rather typical of great Irish writers, against an ominous background of explosions and demolitions. I could talk at length about these and others of my favourite works, but I want to look now at this great book that we're launching here tonight. And I'm very proud indeed to do so. This book reflects early Hillen. It reflects work that comes from, in some cases, in some images, a very long time ago. Think of a very young Newry man, almost a boy. Some of these were taken, I think, when about 19. Wandering around with a camera, with a variety of cameras, I think, probably. It's in the early 80s, a lot of it. It's a grim time. He's observing orange marches. He's going to the funeral of the hunger striker, Patsy O'Hara. He's going up to Belfast to see a march on the 12th down Royal Avenue. He's observing and recording the rituals of the two tribes of his homeland. And perhaps most movingly, he is taking a series of ravishing photographs, they come at the end of the book, from a long day spent at a mass rock near the town. You know mass rocks, those places of of worship and resort, in a sense, where Mass is said on certain days, and where Mass was said in penal times. They form, I think, some of the most poignant sites of memory in the country, and they may well have been holy places since long before Christianity. Putting these pictures at the end of the book is intentional, I think, but the message of the book isn't, and the pictures themselves, aren't political in a narrow sense, except perhaps for a particularly painful series showing the effects of plastic bullets, one of these images was in fact used to make a political point in a newspaper. But the pictures in this book in general, often brilliantly constructed, especially in the way people are positioned in relation to each other, sometimes technically jagged for one reason or another, which sometimes makes them all the more effective. These pictures are more than a political or a sociological representation. They are, I think, historical documentation, of course, but they're also a statement about the spirit of place, which I think is why those Mass rock pictures at the end are so important. And they're about the unendurable sadness of living in the uncertainties of conflict and poverty. Poverty that is spiritual as well as actual, and clinging to certitudes while you do live in this way. I was recently looking at the extraordinary book of text and photographs produced in the late 1930s by James Agee and Walker Evans, called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. And in it they recorded the lives of the poor sharecroppers in Dust Bowl, America. Ironically, they were commissioned to do so by Fortune magazine, which then refused to publish the book. It's an extremely powerful book, and I think those pictures, though they're much more formally composed than Seán's in Melancholy Witness, I think these pictures have some of the same anger and beauty. And the Walker Evans photographs are also visionary, in that Hillen way, which would later become familiar. Because these are visionary photographs in Melancholy Witness. Note the eye for bizarre conjunctions. Note the altar set up under the awning of a barred-up Dunn's supermarket. Note the filmic sequence, 3 sequential shots of a stone thrower and his Land Rover adversary. Note the cunning and suggestive use of the written word. Throughout these pictures, bizarre legends and assertive slogans turn up, advertising the unlikely in the middle of the unthinkable. And if you want to look forward to the artist that the boy with the camera will become, note the eye for the banal and bizarre. The Hillen minx or the Ford Cortina placed at an angle to the universe, while in the background an explosion cloud rolls ominously behind a half-demolished building. This is the Hillen vision, a world where people nod at apparent certainties and go about their business while apocalypse trembles on the edge of their eyeballs. I own 2 original Hillen collages, and I covet more. One of them is from a series that followed some years later, and in fact preceded Atlantis. It's called London Newry, an Imaginary City. It's from a series which some of you may know, where Newry Gagarin comes to Earth, poised over his little city. Well, in the one that I have, that Mass rock appears. People grouped on the grass around a holy place, a place of ancient holiness. But it's juxtaposed into an unreal landscape involving the towers of Battersea Power Station, among other things, and the advent of a flying object, which looks part military helicopter and part UFO. It's a disturbing, eerie and beautiful work, and I look at it every morning because it hangs above the kitchen table. After studying Melancholy Witness, I can see partly where this complex work that I know so well comes from. Though I think the critic who can tell where everything comes from in Seán's work has not yet been born. His disturbing, hyper-real, sad, and somehow compassionate take on life, reflected in his powerful and original art, is already the subject of distinguished critical essays and brilliant commentary, as well as student theses. I think of essays by Fintan O'Toole and McMaroney, among others. And this book is a vital part of it. That's one reason why it must be bought tonight. It will be a collector's item, and you'll be glad of it. The other reason is simply because it is history, and because, like all of Seán's work, it is beautiful. I now want to introduce the man himself.
Well, follow that, as the man said, that's going to be rather difficult. I'm humbled to be here today at all, and I'm very humbled by that, and moved and thrilled and delighted. It takes some absorbing. I have a few words to say. If you put up with me, I'll share them with you. I grew up in Uri, indeed, exactly as is probably obvious. And that was an education in the complexity of reality. I didn't need to study anywhere really at all, and in human beings and the strangeness of their doings. You know, I love my very favourite phrase, my favourite writer is Jimmy Joyce saying, "Show me a normal human being." You know, this thing doesn't exist at all. For one thing, you know, you're 3 miles from the border. We used to go to the dog for excitement. Couldn't get away from me. And so I grew up with, you know, with British television, and Blue Peter formed my childhood. And every year at Christmas, and a sort of kind of gentle propaganda, the band of the Royal Marines or the Horse Guards would come in and parade around the studio. But the strange thing about watching that in Uri is if you looked out your kitchen window, the same guys were lying in camouflage gear in the back garden. Probably the same men. Following you down the sights as they tend following you down the road in their sights. You know, and though that didn't do it for me, I did go through a phase of wanting to be James Bond and take over the world that way. So that was quite confusing really, and eventually I realised that there might be a them and an us, and I might be the them, which was very interesting. But we were in two worlds at once, as Seamus Heaney very brilliantly put it at the beginning of the first Atlantis show. I did grow up with a sort of a liberal Republican analysis, I suppose. My father was a sort of trade union man, a bit of a local wise man people used to come to. But what he instilled in me, what they instilled in me, was a love, what you could only call love for people, and respect for everyone. So, and I thought that I had grown up with a very broad mind and a liberal mentality, you know. And one of my aims with these pictures was to show ordinary people, magnificent, mysterious, ordinary people caught up in this maelstrom that we were all living in. Of course, one of the terrible things of the conflict of this nature is that it causes people eventually to harden their hearts, and they end up doing terrible things to each other. Rather than the Irish writers, of course, again, I think they were afraid to teach us, the Irish writers. I'm not sure, in the Catholic Grammar School in there. We got First World War poetry, which was a wonderful, you know, great English writers. Wilfred Owen, I forever will remember this verse or stanza that goes, all men round God's table sit, and all men must be fed. But this loaf I hold in my hand, this loaf is my son's bread. And I was deeply struck by that, you know, and the poets, like everyone else, were pushed to the machine guns, you know, during that dreadful thing. I had another round of education in 2007 when I, for some reason, sought and eventually took on the co-design of the Oma Bomb Memorial, which was a life-changing experience for me. And I have to say about the Oma thing that is something that must be reinvestigated, and really properly reinvestigated what happened there. I bought the book Lost Lives because I wanted to find out and I wanted to know personally all the victims. I felt that I couldn't respect them if I didn't know about them. And I bought Lost Lives, you know, it's the catalogue of 3,700 plus deaths. But what everybody gets is a few column inches and you learn about their lives. And I had a huge psychic shock over it, reading it. I couldn't stop reading it. And you find out about these people and their lives. And what I realized was that all through my life and later, even though I thought that I had a well-adjusted attitude, that during the conflict we parsed every death not by who people were, but by what they were, by their labels. And I had discovered in the 80s and 90s a great philosopher of the last century called Robert Anton Wilson, who I discovered that young people and I were actually very interested in. And I learned from him the idea of reality tunnels, which comes from Alfred Korzybski. And the idea is that we live in the world of our own belief system and we project that back onto the world and we kind of see what we already believe. That relates to McLuhan's, dictum that the map is not the territory. That that we are deluded by language, it's kind of hypnotic, and that we feel we know these things. Wilson's advice is, of course, that our duty as human beings is to step outside our own realities and see the picture as big as we possibly can in order in the dire hope of seeing it more clearly. And this is where art comes in, I think, and photography in particular. Because, I was kind of doing research and going to see the orange men that we could hear from a mile and a half away. And I probably met in the local shops, but I didn't know them, and I didn't know their lives, and I didn't know who they were. But through photographs, we have a chance almost to step in their shoes, at least to look them in the eyes as human beings, as fellow human beings. And I think that is the strength, be it inadvertent, it is the strength of these pictures and why they're important and why it's so marvellous that they've been retrieved and saved from the skip. They're as humane portraits as I could make in this maelstrom, and I find them really fascinating actually still and very deeply moving, and I hope you do too. I want to thank Roy for his very, very generous words, his very generous presence, the National Library of Ireland for their kindness in allowing us to be here today, and its director and staff, and particularly Elizabeth Carroll, who was the visionary, who saw these pictures, who realised that these pictures had a value and should have a life. Roland Colvin of the History Press, who then saw that there could be a book, and his staff, they made this really marvellous book from them. Aidan Kelly, who I can't be here today, who actually partially saved them by